We've been doing this series called The One, and we've moved it back because we're going to have the baptismal service tonight. But the series has been called The One, and how important the one is. And I was just watching those stories, and each one of those stories, it mentioned one event, one friend, or one situation, or one thing that happened. Quite often, finding Jesus is a lot of one steps, but it was so interesting that that final step was like, this is the one thing, or whatever, you know? And I just thought that was really exciting. Now, where am I here? Here we go. Okay. So, I had wanted to chat a little bit to those getting baptized and also to the rest of you. It was funny, Ian was preaching this morning, and he said to me last night, he said, you know, I don't think I have enough stories. And I said, don't worry. I said, I don't have enough Bible. So my sermon tonight wasn't very much Bible and theology, and his was no story. So it's balanced, okay? Anyways. So I don't know what time I meant to finish, so I'll just finish when I finish, okay? So I can remember, I got the liberty here. I can remember when I was a little girl, I was at school, and as you can guess, I loved a good laugh. And I was a bit of a goofball. And I can remember, you know, just goofing off, and we had this elderly teacher who was just, you know, she was just so sweet, but she was just so easy to take advantage, and was like, can I go to the toilet? We would all meet out and have a laugh. You know, I was about 8, 9, 10 years old. And it was terrible. You know, I look back with horror at how awful I was. And then, you know, at the end of that year, my grades went from A. I was in the American system, so they went A, B, C, and I got an F. And it was in math, and was just like so awful. And I remember thinking, do I go home and put a line through it and tell my dad it was an A, but I knew it wouldn't work. Anyways, the following year, I got a male teacher, Cully Anderson. And Cully Anderson really, really inspired me. He was the one person who really turned my attitude towards education around. And I know he was good looking, but I just he rode a motorcycle to school, and in those days you could jump on the back and hold on to your teacher. He was so much fun. I grew up in Afghanistan, and so it was a little missionary school, and it was all good. And he was just so much fun, and he would give us rides around the block in his motorcycle. But I so wanted to please him, and I would study hard, and I would do well. And, you know, my grades gradually got better and better. And by the end of that year, I got an A. And then, you know, we came back here and whatever, and I never saw Cully Anderson again. And many years later, I found his wife on Facebook. You know, Facebook is great for that. And I found Julie, and there was no page for Cully. And then his daughter had tagged him. He must be an older man now. He's in his 70s. I think he went back from there. I think he gave up on teaching, and he went and became a pastor. I'm not sure. But I found his page, and I wrote on there, and I said, you know, Mr. Anderson, it was because you took an interest to help me. It was because you inspired me that actually I became a teacher because of that. And I love to inspire children. And it was so funny, you know, the legacy goes on. The last 2 months I've been given a primary 4 class because the teacher had gone away. And of course, I gathered the kids and we're teaching away and all this. And we had parents' night last week, a couple of weeks ago. And a few of the parents was quite interesting. They were like, yeah, I don't understand it. My kids just love math. I don't know what you've done. And I thought, Cully Anderson, your legacy is still going on. And the power of the one. And you know, I wanted to just share a little story about, this is my Bible bit, okay guys? I wanted to share a little bit about the Samaritan woman. And you know, her story is found in John chapter, they've put a timing up for me as well. Okay, right, thank you. Good there. So John chapter 4, it's behind me. I'd want the Passion Translation, and they don't have the Passion Translation. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and then I'm going to speak about it. So Jesus has been in Judea, and he's with his disciples. He started his ministry, and it says in verse 4, but Jesus needed to go through Samaria. And you know, it's really interesting, because if you were in Aberdeen here, and you were wanting to go from here to West Hill, the most obvious thing would be to go to Mount Hooley, get on the road, and you drive and drive and drive, and it will take you straight to West Hill. It would be crazy if you were going to West Hill and you thought, I can't go through Kingswells and the roundabouts there, I don't like the people that live there, and you took a detour and went all the way around Cults and back to West Hill. Well, that's kind of what it was like. The Jews hated going, they just didn't like this group of people. They didn't like the people in Kingswells, okay? They just didn't like them. And so they would take this detour every single time. And Jesus was like, we need to go through Samaria. And you can imagine his disciples thinking, why? What's in Samaria? They're just a bunch of losers. There's people that, they intermarried, they're our enemies, we don't like them. But it says in the Bible, Jesus had to go through Samaria. And I'll just pick up a little bit of the story here. Wearied by his long journey, as they got to Samaria, Jesus sat down at the edge of Jacob's well. He sent his disciples into the village to buy some food, for it was already afternoon. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Could you give me a drink of water?" Surprised, she said, "Why would a Jewish man ask a Samaritan for a drink of water? If only you knew the gift I had." And then it goes on, and they have this amazing conversation. And in this conversation, Jesus tells her about, who he is, and he tells her about the living water, and he tells her, and he reveals himself to her. And he also says to her, and, go and tell your husband and bring him out. And she said, well, I actually don't have a husband. And, he goes, yeah, I know that, and he kind of reveals to her that he knows her past, but he still wants to have a conversation with her. And I was thinking about the series of the One, and I was thinking about our baptismal candidates. And something? There's always someone hidden in Samaria. And these people who are getting baptized, they were hidden. Some of them were hidden in our city. Some of them were hidden in Glasgow. Some of them were hidden in other places. But there are hidden people within this city that we need to find. And I was thinking to myself, Jesus is amazing, because if you were wanting to sell a product, if you had some special product and you had one hour, one afternoon, and you got to come into the city of Aberdeen for 1 hour, you got to choose a time, you got to choose a place to sell your product. I think to get the most people gathered, if Aberdeen does well, I would go to Pataudry, because I think, at least about 10, maybe 15,000 people, depending if it's a good day, could walk past and I could hand out my flyers, Or I would talk to some of the important people. If I just had a couple hours, I would try to gather the people and tell them things. But isn't it amazing that Jesus doesn't go for the obvious? Jesus didn't turn up to Pataudry on a Sunday after the match. He turned up on a Monday when the place was empty, when there was just the caretaker picking up the rubbish. That's the equivalent of it. And he turns up at a really special place, Jacob's Well. And this is a place that everybody gathers, but they gather at dawn and they gather at dusk. They don't gather at lunchtime. But Jesus goes to the place that's significant, but he goes when it's not a gathering place. And I just think it's so amazing. Sometimes we think, oh yeah, how will Aberdeen be won? Yes, it'll be won by going and doing a big evangelistic crusade. It'll be done by this, it'll be done by that. But you know what? There's maybe some one person hidden here that will unlock the key to this city. And so this is what Jesus does. He goes there, and in his heart is this lost community in Samaria. And he needs to show his disciples that he is about the lost. He wants to go to the lost community. He needs to lead by example. And he goes into a place where these disciples have so much racism, so much, prejudice. And Jesus chooses a woman. And in those days, women were just not that important. And he chooses someone to have this conversation with. And it is so amazing. We watched the baptismal service, all the different ones, but this is who Jesus chose that was his one. And later on we're going to sing a song. I thought we were going to sing it beforehand, but it is the song, I am who you say I am. And she was just this woman. And I think it's so interesting. Jesus is parked by the well, and he says to his disciples, on you go. I think he told them to go, not because he was hungry, but he needed to get them out of his world. He needed to get that distraction out of the way. They might have been the ones with all the prejudice saying things, and he almost wanted them to go away, and he's sitting there. And I love the song, The Shadow Step. Because the words are, you met me at the sinner's table. I found you waiting by the well, unexpected. You were always there tracing my steps. And then it goes, you never left the lost forsaken. And you know, as Jesus sat there, I believe he sat there and thought, yep, I can see her now. She's picking up that clay jar, and she's coming at a time when she knows she will meet nobody. This woman had had so much rejection. She must have been in her 40s. She'd had 5 marriages. She was, she didn't want to maybe meet the ex-wife. She didn't want to meet, or they didn't want to meet her. She didn't want to meet relatives. I don't know. But she goes and chooses to go and collect her water at the hardest time of the day. It's a journey that really is so difficult for her. And yet she makes that journey. And they're sitting by the well, watching her walking towards them. As the disciples are leaving, this beautiful lady with her clay jar is making an ordinary journey, but it's not an ordinary journey. It's an extraordinary conversation she's going to have. And if you speak to some of these people getting baptized, it probably was an ordinary day. It was somebody saying, why don't you come to youth? It was just a Tuesday at school. Why don't you come to youth? It was just an ordinary day. But when we collide with Jesus, something supernatural and extraordinary happens. And I find it interesting, that whole story, the song, The Shadow Step. If you see a shadow, you look at that shadow and you cannot tell, is that a shadow of a male or a female? Is it an old person, a young person? Is it a Jew? Is it a Gentile? Is it black? Is it white? What is it? It doesn't know. But he traces our shadows, and he loves every shadow the same. And that's what I like about that. The words and the imagery it conjures up in my mind. And Jesus, it says, they've said that religion is man's attempt to get to God. But Jesus is God's attempt to get to man. And Samaria was full of religion. They had religion. They had a synagogue. They had this Jacob's well. They had things, but they hadn't reached Jesus. And they had the religion, but it took Jesus to come. And it took Jesus to come and have a conversation with this beautiful lady. And he has this conversation with her. And it's so interesting because, she wants to have an argument. Why are you talking to me? And where's your water? And, you think you're more important? And, and Jesus is really wise. He doesn't get into the debate. How many times are we talking to people and they want to debate? Oh, yeah, church is full of hypocrites. And we're like, well, no, actually. And we start having this argument with them or da-da-da-da-da. And, we start debating. Let's just lift him up. Okay? Let's just lift him up by how we live. Let's lift him up by how kind we are. Let's lift him up in different things. Let's not get into these silly debates. And he didn't get into the debate. He sent away his disciples on he didn't want them to distract him, but he also didn't want, them to be there to get involved and to start arguing with her. They might have jumped in and said, well, yes, but no, he didn't. And they have this conversation and he talks to her and everything. And then she said, what? Okay, and she can't believe this. And when he reveals who he is, she's like, what? We have been expecting a Messiah, but we didn't know. And he said, look, I'm here. And she drops her jar and she runs all the way back to the village. Interesting, she walked alone, but she's able to gather people to come back. And I think it's because Jacob's well was quite a significant place. And she must have said to them, I don't know if they followed her, but she must have said, there's somebody at the well. There's somebody there to meet. Interesting, the disciples also went into Samaria, didn't they? They also went in to get food, but they didn't tell anybody that the bread of life, the Jesus who would sort them, was sitting at the well. They just went in and got the physical food, but they didn't tell them the good news that was sitting waiting there, but she did. She had the boldness to, and she had the tenacity and the boldness to say, you know what, I'm going to go and get it. So she went and these people come. And you know what I love about Jesus? He was on a mission with his disciples. They were going somewhere. He had to go through there because he wanted to have the conversation with the one. But they come out and they start hearing him and his heart starts breaking. And he says, you know what? we're going to stay here for a couple of days. We're just going to stay and hang here for a couple of days because I can see that there's a lot of lost people here. I know you've got your life together, and I know these few people have come out to the well, but there's a whole Samaria out there that I need to do. And I love it that Jesus likes to be distracted. Never feel that you're interrupting him. Never feel that you're getting in his way and you're a distraction and you're a problem. He loves to be interrupted. He loves to be spoken to. It was a funny thing, we had this chat, it was my son-in-law, he got a job, it was like, pray for Josh. And I was like, yeah, pray for Josh. So we were praying for this job. And then when he got the job, I started watching, left the chat. And I thought to myself, every day we were meeting Jesus to talk about that job. So I chose to keep that alarm going. And every day I'm keeping that alarm going to say, thank you for the job. Thank you, Lord, for the job. Thank you for the job. I don't want to leave that chat. I wonder how many times we have these chats with our prayers. And I hope when the 727 stops someday in Jesus' name, we don't all leave the chat and think, whew, that alarm has gone. Let's keep that chat going, because I think it's like, whoa, 727. Here's where King's Community Church. Come on, speak to me. Tell me what you want. And I think he gets excited. Let's not leave those things. Anyways, so the legacy of the one. So we've had the chat, he's met the woman, and the legacy. He stayed there for 2 days. I think there was an absolute revival that happened. He's spoken to people. I bet he healed them. He did lots of things. I can imagine the disciples going, wow, okay, we'll hang out here for 2 days. But you know what they saw? They saw a Jesus who was willing to be distracted. They saw a Jesus who was willing to go after the lost, to go after the women, to go after the prejudice, to not be racist. And they saw Jesus. So, when Jesus lived his life and he went back to heaven, those disciples, they did exactly that. They went into the places to seek the ones, to find the ones, and to do different things like that. And they were amazing. And when you scroll on to Acts, and I was just going through the Acts from different things, and in Acts chapter 9, verse 31, it's talking about the early church. And the early church has happened. There's been great revival. Everything's happening. And it says in verse 31 there, it might be up there, it mentions that the church is doing so well. And Peter says, it says there, the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace and was strengthened, living in the fear of God and encouraged by the Holy Spirit, and they increased in numbers. All because Jesus went out of his way to find the one most unlikely person and to bring them in. And something? Not far from here, just a few streets away, was a woman. And there's a great story about Mary Slessor. Mary Slessor was a woman from Aberdeen, born and bred here in 1848. She was born into a family in Gilcomston, a family of 7 kids. And Mary Slessor was born into poverty. She was born with an alcoholic, abusive father, and she was very poor. And she lived here for about 11 years, and then the family went to Dundee. And, the father got a job, and life was really awful for them and really difficult. And Mary kind of went her own way. She was illiterate. She didn't know anything. She went her own way, was quite rebellious. And one day, a little widow, an elderly widow in the street, pulled Mary in and sat her down and said, Mary, I need to tell you about hell. And she was like, whoa. And she told her about hell, and, this is where bad people go, because Mary was one of those people who wasn't making some bad choices. And she was so scared that night that she thought to herself, wow, I don't know what to do. So the next day she went to church to find out, is there something else? And she found out about Jesus, and she found out about the love. Because this woman took the time to speak to her, she found Jesus. And she started going to Jesus and finding out about Jesus. And she then started having a burden for Africa. And I know the Nigerians in here will know much about Mary Slessor, because when she was about 27 years old, she boarded a boat, and it took her 1 month to get to Nigeria. And she went to Nigeria, And they said, you can't go there. It's a white man's grave. You will die. And she was single and determined because she wanted to make a difference. She had heard about David Livingstone, and she went there. And in Nigeria at that time, they had a terrible practice where they would get twin baby. If babies were born and they were twins, then they felt that they were possessed by an evil spirit. So they either killed the second child, the second twin that was born, but what the practice was is they would take the twins and just put them out into the forest and say, no, let them die. That's going to bring an evil presence into this. And so many, many children died, and that was what they did. Another thing they did when a man died, they would kill the woman as well. They said, well, she needs to serve him in the afterlife. How is a man going to manage without a woman? I don't know. Anyways, they decided they would kill these poor women. And so these widows would be killed and murdered. And Mary came with the love of Jesus, and she started talking to them. And then she realized, you know what, I need to become native like them. And she started dressing like them, learning the language, and she stayed there until she died. She came back 2 or 3 times because she had illnesses. But you know something? She devoted her life to the country there. And there's hospitals, there's a national day, there's all sorts of things. I know Queen Elizabeth, when she went there, she laid a bouquet of flowers at the grave. But you know something? When all of those different things happened, it said that her greatest legacy wasn't the hospitals and everything else. Her greatest legacy was the changed lives. And she adopted some of those kids, and those kids went on and they had life. It all started with an elderly lady who took this girl in to tell her that there was a heaven, that there was a hell, and that there was more to life than her chaotic life that she had known. And I bet that elderly lady never knew what Mary was going to become. She never knew the ripple effect that that would have. But someday, and when she gets to heaven, she's going to have all these Nigerians going up to her and saying, hey, thank you so much for talking to Mary. Thank you so much for what you did. Because of what you did, I'm alive today. Because of what you did, I'm the twin that she rescued. And you know, it was about 10, 20 years ago, the Clydesdale Bank actually brought out a £10 note. And on the £10 note, that's actually Mary Slessor, and you don't even know you're carrying it around in your wallets. But that's a picture of her. And on the reverse side is actually the area that she worked in Nigeria. And so just the power of one is just so amazing. And I was trying to think about the baptismal candidates today, and I just wanted to have a quick little word with you about different things. Now, many years ago, many years ago, I used to do some knitting, okay? I know you think knitting is for grannies, but I did it when I was in my 20s. Don't ask me why. And I just want to say to you 7 people who are getting baptized tonight, you know, when you pick up, you know, if I show you some of I have a couple of things here I just want to show you. And, you know, I wanted to just explain that, you know, your life is like a ball of wool, okay? And, you know, as you knit your life, you know, you do the rib bit and you're doing your thing. But, you know, when you hand over the reins to Jesus, he's got a specific pattern for you, okay? And there's a specific pattern for your specific life. And every garment is different, okay? The garment that you have is different from the other garment. This little garment I made here is for a little child. And this pattern is very different than this pattern. And this pattern here, you know, this pattern here, you needed that amount of space. You only see that pattern in a larger garment. But for this pattern here, there was lots of little holes and lots of little baubles, and it was for a child. And you know, all I would say to you guys is, when you hand your life over to Jesus, as you have done, you know, he gets to hold it. He's got the pattern. He gets to take those knitting needles. And those knitting needles come in many sizes. They're thin ones, thick ones. The balls of wool can be hairy ones, big ones, thin ones. There's different types of wool that you have. And he weaves things into your life. And he weaves patterns. And as as you stand here today to get baptized, he is weaving your life together. Don't look at the next person's garment and think, I want that. Why don't I get that little cable in my knitting? Or why is this one this color? Or why is this one that color? You know, God weaves us all together. He makes us all different. And you know, I can remember when my kids went to the brownies and Cubs and things like that. They attend for a few weeks, and then when they take their solemn promise, you go and you hear the things. And that's kind of what tonight is like. You've been on this journey of Christianity, you've made a decision, and tonight is kind of like your promise. It's like you're coming out. You're emerging to say, you know what, in front of my friends, in front of my family, this is me, okay? And so sometimes, and I want to say this to you, it's not always a bed of roses. And sometimes you're like, Lord, what are you doing? You have dropped a few stitches here. There's a whole bunch of stitches you've dropped. I don't understand why you've dropped them. There's a few holes in my garment. What's going on, Lord? And he's going, you know what? They're the buttonholes. Or they're the little ones that I'm actually going to weave some ribbons through. And so don't worry about dropped stitches. Don't worry about different things. This is the eternal weaver is weaving your particular garment. And you know what? And what I would say to all of you is, don't compare your patterns and all that. And I would say, Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6, I just want to read it to you. For all of you getting baptized, trust in him completely, as you already have, and do not rely on your own opinions. With all your heart, rely on him to guide you, and he will lead you and into every decision you make. Become intimate with him and in whatever you do, and he will lead you wherever you have to go. Don't think for a moment that you know it all, for wisdom comes when you adore him with undivided devotion. And what I would say to you people is today, go in the strength that Jesus has given you. Keep his Holy Spirit present with you. Make sure you don't neglect the Word of God. That is the only thing that sustains us. Keep good fellowship with people. That means we have so many things in church. Keep together with the connect groups. Find people when those holes come, when those stitches get dropped, find someone that can come alongside you and say, it's okay. I was in that journey as well, and it comes okay. Just watch it. I know there's another thread that's been woven here. Don't worry about it. It will be okay. It's going to be all right. And you know what? I just love the movie, The Greatest Showman. And the song, I'm not going to sing it to you, you'll be glad to know, is This Is Me. And I just thought, for all you guys, look out, world, here you come. You're now marching to the beat of his drum. This is brave. This is you. This is who you're meant to be, okay? It's a new life. It's a new day. And I would just say, absolutely go for it. Grab the attention, and this is me. This is who you are. Nail those colors to the mast, and that's who you are, and you just go from strength to strength. This is a great day, but when Jesus was baptized, he went into the desert. So don't just think, wow, a lot of people build up to something like this and think, this is it, this is wonderful, it's a bed of roses, and then the trials come. But don't worry. He has already gone ahead of you. He's got the pattern. He's got it all sorted. He hasn't shown you what the full image looks like, but who knows what you could be. You could be a Mary Slessor. You could be anybody. You'll be what he chooses you to be so long as you release your life and everything that he has into the weaver's hands and let him knit those knitting patterns for you. So I'll just hand back over to Craig just now. Thank you.